Hey everyone, this is of course Zach the Crowbar, and I have a exclusive interview with one of the writers for Spec Ops: The Line from 2K Games. So this is him.
Hi, Walt Williams. I'm lead writer on Spec Ops: The Line for 2K and Jaeger. Glad I could be here.
Fantastic. We just played a bit of the demo over there, and it's a very cinematic game. I remember seeing some updates about it, saying how it's really going to push the line of how people are going to view those in war. You know, games like Call of Duty don't really show the effects of it. You're just kind of doing it. How were you able to portray it in such a more graphic way than other war games?
Well, what we did with Spec Ops is to make this, we wanted to make it a more personal story for right off the bat. So rather than making it about a broader global conflict or where you're fighting some made-up terrorist organization who has a nuke, something that is a bit hard to relate to, we wanted to make it more about the soldiers. So we had to create a conflict that was very personal. We chose a city that wasn't connected to any past conflicts or current conflicts. We chose an enemy that wasn't an enemy you would necessarily look at and say, yes, okay, this is someone I'm supposed to shoot. You're fighting American soldiers, people you were sent there to save, people who look like you. By doing this, you know, we create this kind of a world and a conflict that keeps the player always on, never really on sure footing. And once we have that, then we're able to like bring the characters out of Captain Walker, who you're playing as, and your squad mates, Lieutenant Adams and Sergeant Lugo, and the dynamic of having them go through these experiences and emotionally experience them and see how it changes all three of them, each of them in a different way.
It definitely sounds like a way better departure from, you know, just the standard center your target, pull the trigger kind of thing. You know, there's character in the soldier that you're playing as, so it's nice that you're taking the time to go for a character route rather than, you know, just write a standard typical war game that you can write in your sleep.
Right. Well, that's the thing is, you know, when you're looking at taking on any creative endeavor, you're committing to spending quite a bit of time, effort, mind, power, blood, sweat, tears. You have to make something. You have to start off the bat and say, you know, what is it that I'm willing to invest this much amount of time and effort into? We had actually a lot of different questions we were asking at the beginning of this process. We knew that we were going to make a third-person squad-based military shooter. That is the box that we were given. And within that, what did we want to do? And I know myself personally, I asked, if this is the only thing that I ever make, if this is the only thing that gets out there, what do I want it to be? What is the game out there that I want to play that no one is making? And within that box, looking at war films from the 70s and the 80s that really broke out of the mold of just being simple black and white, good guy, bad guy kind of a thing, and went into things like Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, the real like psychological, emotional aspects of war. That was what we wanted to do with this game, because we felt that for some reason games had failed to make that jump. We were still stuck in the good guy, bad guy, summer blockbuster spectacle kind of thing. So we were really very lucky that 2K was not only willing to go down this road with us, but also very enthusiastic and supportive of it. You get into a project like this, and every couple months someone asks, are we sure that people want to play a game like this? Is it maybe too dark? Don't people just want to play a game to have fun? And the answer to that, we believe, is no. People want more out of their art. With books, with music, with movies, we are constantly using our art to safely explore our emotions, whether they be happiness, anger, sadness. And we felt like with games, if we really want to embrace the medium as an artistic medium, we have to be willing to open up outside of environments and scenarios and situations where we are just the hero, saving the day, saving the world, getting the girl. Like, it had to be more about getting into the shoes of another person and really experiencing something that you may not be entirely comfortable with, something that you may not get a chance to experience in your day-to-day life. And ultimately with Spec Ops, that's what we set out to make, and feel that, you know, we've accomplished.
From what I'm hearing you explain, how you're writing the story and everything what you're doing. Then in the opening scene of the demo, they're going through the desert, and there's fire everywhere, and he's seeing, you know, the people in the sand, you know, that are clearly dead. You know, I would assume those are like the people that he's killed, you know, that he regrets because he doesn't want to do any of this kind of thing, but because he's a soldier, he has to. in many ways, like it seems very reminiscent of like a Band of Brothers kind of thing, because that show wasn't about the war; it was about the characters. And one of my favorite war shows, I've seen, and when I first went into this, I will be totally honest. I thought it was going to be, just like a third-person Call of Duty ripoff, just this simple, standard, cookie-cutter story.
Right.
But can you really blame me after all the games? There's a new Call of Duty every year. So
well, we want you to think that. That was very much by design. We want people to come into this game thinking, I know this story, I know these characters, I know how this is going to play out, because that's the exact emotion that Walker and his squad have coming into this mission. For them, it's just a simple recon mission. Come in, look around, leave. This is routine. Nothing big's going to happen. Just a walk on the beach for them, and they're going to get out and go home. And then, I bit my tongue, and then something happens, and everything changes, and now they don't know what's going to happen. Now they're thinking about what's going on, they're emotionally invested, they want to find out more. That's what we want the player to be feeling. When they're comfortable and thinking they know everything, we can pull that rug out from underneath them. Now they're surprised, now they're scared, now they're uncertain, now they want to go further in and unravel this mystery of what's happening in Dubai. Spec Ops is a military game by genre standards. When you get down into the story, though, it's really not a story about war. It's a story about really expectations, who we believe we are and who we actually are, particularly as gamers. Who do we think we are when we sit down to play a game, and who are we actually? And this allegory is really the driving force behind Spec Ops, and ultimately what the subtitle, The Line, is really getting at.
What were you kind of like your inspirations to kind of tweak your own story, but give it enough to where someone is still able to like relate to it? Like, what was your inspiration for the story for this?
Well, I mean, the main inspiration was just coming into it was to tell the kind of story we didn't feel anyone was telling. Like to make a military shooter. Well, let me go back just a little further before that. It seems that as gamers, especially with shooters, we've trained ourselves to emotionally disconnect from the action, which is interesting though, because we have a very strong opinion of war in our day-to-day lives. Whether you're for it or against it, we generally understand that war is a very traumatic experience for everyone fighting it on either side. And yet with video games, we've allowed ourselves to become emotionally disconnected from this truth, which is interesting because a controller, when you're playing a shooter, is so symbolic. You are pulling a trigger on a controller. That character in that world is pulling a trigger on a gun, and on the other end, someone is dying. And while you may never consider in your life ever even pulling a gun on a person, you are totally fine simulating this act within a game. And we wanted to take something about the genre that people have kind of allowed themselves to emotionally distance from and force them to emotionally connect with it. Force them to think about the correlation between what they're doing with that controller and what is happening in that world. Simulation, video game, real, not real, this is still something you're choosing to sit down, put the disc in, and take part in these actions. These actions do not exist until you play that game, and we want people to be thinking about that. And that was the real inspiration from the get-go of what is the kind of story and the game we wanted to make, was something that took the genre and made that people are kind of, people have come to expect what they're getting and not think too much about it, but just instead make them think. As regards to like more specific tonal inspirations, Generation Kill was a big inspiration, especially in getting the dynamic of the squad, the personalities of soldiers, how they go from being very casual to very, professional in just a second, how that training kicks in as soon as a gun goes off. More artistic things, the film Jacob's Ladder. Apocalypse Now was an inspiration very early on. It's probably the most easily identifiable inspiration because both stories share the same conceit. You are going into this kind of wilderness area looking for this one man. But it's definitely worth noting that Spec Ops is not an adaptation of Hard Night Darkness. It's not an adaptation of Apocalypse Now. Those stories are about Kurtz and about unraveling the layers of Kurtz, where Spec Ops, the character of Conrad, is more the catalyst of this tale. It's really about unraveling who Captain Walker is, who Sergeant Lugo and Lieutenant Adams are, who you are as a player. You are the central focus of the revelations in Spec Ops, not who this Conrad character is. Outside of that, I mean, I think everyone on the team brings in their own personal inspirations artistically. You see it in the art style of the city, and the actors bring in their own inspirations with the characters when they're, bringing them to life. That's the beauty of video games. It's such a collaborative effort that it's hard to pinpoint just one main inspiration most of the time.
Well, all good stories are never just based off of one thing. They're always something. They're a mix of everything. As when you're a creative writer in this instance, you always have your characters that share your different the archetypes of who they are. There's the carbon copy hero, then there's the anti-hero, or there's he is a hero, but he's a real douche.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of archetype is the main character for Spec Ops?
He's not really any of those three archetypes that you've just described. He is I'm hesitant to say he's a brand new archetype because that sounds really egotistical of me to say. So I won't say that, but with Walker, we wanted to create someone who is realistic to a military commander. He's a bit distant, not because he's a hard ass, not because he's mysterious, but because this is a man who has to command his two squad mates. Like if shit hits the fan, they can't be thinking of him as their friend. They have to be thinking about him as their commander. So at the beginning, yeah, he's a little more loose, a little more casual, because they don't believe that they are in a combat mission. When things hit the fan, things get bad, he drops a lot of that friendly and casualness. He becomes much more strictly about orders. He's very short with them. He's keeping that distance because he knows at some point in time he may have to give them an order that will lead to their death. This is a training. This is something you have to do when you're a military commander, especially in a combat situation. Outside of that, who he is on the inside, this is a man who thinks he is a hero. I think, and that's what I say what I mean when I say I think this is a fourth archetype. Because you have those three different types of heroes, but Walker is written to be a man who's just a man, but who's trying to be a hero. And the thing is, in real life, there rarely are heroes. Trying to act a hero in certain situations is not going to go well. It's not going to help anyone out. Sometimes it's a bit unrealistic. There's a reason soldiers are trained to follow orders. Many times those orders are the difference between life and death, not just you, but in other people. When you start to step out of those, whether or not it's for what you deem to be a good cause, it's because you're trying to be a hero, things can happen. Things that you aren't necessarily wanting to happen. And that's with Walker and with the squad. We wanted more to represent them as real people who will change and grow. Their opinions are, Lugo at the beginning is kind of the wisecracking guy, but it's because he's new. It's his first mission. He's nervous. He's making jokes. He drops it very quickly as soon as things get really serious, and he kind of goes in on himself and doesn't really know what to do and becomes very emotionally closed off and begins expressing his discomfort and his fear in an outwardly aggressive way. Adams falls back on his training, becomes very stringent about rules. Walker ends up having to take on these hard decisions and learning these hard facts and deciding to, what does his squad not need to know? What things can he keep from them? There's an intel item in the game. We have two different types of intel items. One is the basic backstory kind of intel, but the other is you find an item in the world and the information you get from it is actually what Walker is thinking when he's examining this item. So you're getting into his mind in a way that we wouldn't get externally because he would never admit these things to his squad. He has to keep that distance. And there's this one particular item that he picks up early in the game that sheds light on something that has already occurred, something that it's a very uncomfortable revelation. And he makes the decision not to tell his squad because now that he knows, he can make better command decisions, and he feels the situation is stressful enough. They don't need to know. He will carry this weight for them. This is the kind of man that Walker is. He thinks that he can carry the world on his back, that he can be the hero, and whether or not he actually can, well, that's something the player's going to have to discover for themselves.
you pretty much convinced me that this is going to be one of the better stories of any game that I have played, especially in terms of a shooter. I mean, there's a lot of shooting games out there, and especially in this day and age. Last year was a bad year for games. There was just shooters everywhere, and they were too much about the standard gameplay and there was no real story behind it. Characters were getting killed off, but you didn't feel the need to care. Spoiler alert, by the way, in Gears of War 3, there's a character that dies, and yes, you have played as him and you see everything, but because the character was so poorly developed, you don't really, when he does in fact die, you don't really, it doesn't matter. It's just like he left for the bathroom and he's taking longer. So I can see the time and effort it's taken to build a character, and it seems like the game, it's finally a game that's built around the story. They have a genre that they're going for, but the story is still built around the story, and the story is built around the character, which is the way a story should be written.
Absolutely. We're really excited for this to finally get out there. This is a game we've been working on for a long time. I've been writing it for a long time, and it's unfortunate. It's the nature of doing PR for games. You have to give out little tidbits at a time, and the writer inside of me is like, no, that's out of context. That hurts me. There was a whole build up to that scene. Then I gotta wait. But we're 20 days out. The game ships on June 26th for 360, PlayStation 3, and for PC. And I think people are going to be very surprised about Spec Ops. I think I don't think people really know what they're in for with this game.
Oh, thank you very much for taking the time to answer, the few questions about the story.
No, hey, thank you for taking the time, coming and playing the game, and sitting down and talking. Honestly, this is the best part of making a game for me. You release a game, you don't get to talk to people about it. You don't get to sit down with the gamers and have a discussion. This is, when you guys come and play it and talk, this is the best part. This is where you really get to get into the nitty-gritty,
All right. Well, thank you again. I'm looking forward to the game. I'll definitely be getting it. You've pretty much convinced me, so I'm just going to be playing it for the story mainly. Hopefully I can add something, I can add it to my list of games with, a story that's worth mentioning.
I hope so too. I think you will. Anyway, thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you.